Hello, I'm Charles Coves, Australasia's passion provocateur. Welcome to this week's episode of the Charles Coves Show. And I welcome you, whether you're watching on YouTube or Rumble or listening via podcast on many different platforms. In this week's episode, I discuss children's education and the question of who is responsible. I say it's not the government's responsibility. I say education of children is the responsibility of the parents or the guardians of the children. I attended the book launch of Your Children, Take the Lead on Their Education by a friend of mine, Cheryl Lacey, a lifelong educator. Her book is an excellent manual on how to take responsibility for the education of your children, your grandchildren, or your nieces or nephews, or those children for whom you care. Your nation's future depends on the proper, effective, and appropriate education of the children in your country. I urge all of us to understand this crucial factor in the future of each nation, of each nation's success, and choose to engage in the topic rather than leaving it to the government. Remember, government is not your friend. As you have heard me say in many episodes of this show, leaving education to the government will lead to disaster. Our format for this show is to share the big idea for the week, to share 6 resources to help you implement some of the elements of the big idea, cover a few key happenings over the past week, and then the foundational principles for this show and some background about me is the last part of the show for newer viewers and listeners. So let's get into the big idea. What is a good education for your children, for your grandchildren, for your nieces and nephews? I think it's fair to say that almost everyone agrees we want to have a good education for children, but there's very little agreement on what that is. This episode is inspired by my attendance at Cheryl Lacey's book launch. Her new book is Your Children, Take the Lead on Their Education. I've known Cheryl for quite a few years, and the book is published by Connor Court Publishing in Australia. I recommend her book. The essence of her book is that it is up to parents and guardians to take responsibility for the education of their children, and I also explore this topic in my first book, Passionate People Produce. Let me tell you a story about what a good education might be. For 5 years, I was the president of the Parents and Friends Association at St. Roch's Catholic Primary School in Glen Iris, Melbourne, in Australia. 5 years. No one had ever gone more than 2 years. I had a great committee. We had a large number of people on the committee, and so the workload was shared, so it wasn't a huge burden to be the president. Anyway, we'd had committee meetings, and one of the committee meetings, one of the parents was upset about a decision that the principal had taken. And I said, fair enough, you're upset about it. So before we can talk about whether the principal's decision was right or wrong, we need something against which to test it. I said, so what is your philosophy on education? Because that's what you need to have, a philosophy on education to test whether the principal's decision was consistent or opposed to that philosophy. Well, guess what? That shut up all the conversation because that particular parent and most parents had no philosophy on education. All they wanted was a good education. Well, I urge you to think about what your philosophy on education is. And philosophy, I remind you, comes from 2 Greek words. I've explored this in earlier shows. You can check that out on earlier shows. Philosophy, 2 words from the Greek, philos and sophia. Philos, to like, love. Sophia, wisdom. Philosophy is the love of wisdom. So to have a philosophy on education is to be wise about education. What is the right education for a particular person? What is a good education? What is a bad education? This is such a crucial issue in the future of the country in which you live. And I say that the problem of people leaving it to government leads to shocking education. And I say that education standards in Australia are shocking. To give you one number that Cheryl shared at the book launch, 25% of children in year 9, and bearing in mind that year 12, of course, is the last year of school education, 25% of students in year 9 cannot read or write. They are illiterate. You say, how could that possibly happen? Well, it can happen when you leave education up solely to the government. Now, to help you create your philosophy on education, I often ask the question, well, what is the purpose of a school? What is the purpose of education? Well, Cheryl talks about that, and in the context of what is a school's purpose, and there's a very useful summary here just to provoke your thinking around this. She says, the purpose of school education is to help you prepare your children to live a happy and responsible life. Interesting question, isn't it? A responsible life. I'm big on responsibility. I find most people don't really want to take responsibility, but if you want to be successful in life, you must take responsibility. So that's quite a good statement. The purpose of school education is to help you prepare your children to live a happy and responsible life. And then she says, while at school, three key points. Your children should learn, 1, to behave and be treated fairly. So to behave fairly and to be treated fairly. 2, they should learn essential skills and knowledge to enable them to contribute responsibly to their own lives and the lives of others. Again, the use of the word responsible. And 3, your children should learn how to build on those essential skills and knowledge to pursue their personal goals. I think that's an excellent summary of what a good education would be. So I commend you to think about that. Now, the question of the curriculum at a school. In Australia, there's a national curriculum, and this is to sort of help schools to decide the curriculum. Well, I say having one national curriculum in a country is madness. I say that if you have one national curriculum, then all the decision making around millions of children is then filtered up into a tiny little cabal of people. You don't know who those people are. I say much better is a very broad guide on essential skills and knowledge, and then the curriculum is decided at a local level, at a very local level. When education is controlled at the top of the government pile, it leads to bad outcomes. People in education departments around the world are not to be unthinkingly trusted. They do not have your children's welfare at heart. I say that, I'm very comfortable to say that. I've been an educator myself for 30 years. Education is being kidnapped by people with particular agendas. So the essence here is that guardians need to take responsibility for their children. And one of the games I consider of government is to put pressure on parents to go to work so that they abandon the education of their children to the school. When I was growing up, well, actually, there's a good example. My parents both worked because they were refugees from Hungary, so we had no money. We needed both parents to work. I was one of 6 children. But in many instances, parents these days are unable, they don't have the time, the bandwidth, the health to take an interest in what's actually happening with the education of their children. So most parents abandon it. They don't take responsibility. And I say that the crucial element in a great education is for many parents to be taking responsibility at a school level. That means they need to engage with teachers. They need to attend school meetings. They need to attend meetings with teachers. They need to be willing to spend time when they come home, when the children come home from school. Hey, what have you learned? And if the schools are teaching inappropriate material that you consider to be crucial for a good education, including a whole bunch of crap around transgender, a whole bunch of crap around sex education, a whole bunch of crap around socialism and communism, a whole bunch of crap around the environment, you need to push back. And then in that conversation with the schools, you need to look at, well, what's the policy that's being handed down by the government? And you look at some of this policy and you would be horrified, trust me, because I have looked at some of this policy. And then at the local level at the school, as a parent, you then respectfully engage in, well, what does this policy actually mean? What's the point of this policy? No, we don't like this policy. And then you can form groups of like-minded parents. And again, Cheryl Lacey's book is helpful in giving you a guide. Well, how do you do that? If in our national debate in Australia, around the world, people can't agree on the meaning of man or woman, which many health officials refuse to specify because of the transgender crap debate, well, then think about the complex philosophical, theoretical, academic words used in policies from the Education Department. I say they are all open to interpretation, so that every school with parents who are interested, want to take responsibility for their children's education, that is a great debate to have at the local level. And then it can go back up to the politicians who have dared to impose crazy educational policies. I say the future of every nation is deeply, deeply related to the capability, the education of children, and it's not going well. Do not leave this to government. Government is not your friend in this matter. So let me share some resources. Of course, the book that I recommend this week is Cheryl Lacey's book, Your Children Take the Lead on Their Education. And of course, my book, Passionate People Produce, because I've got a whole chapter on how to encourage passion in your children at school. It's very powerful. People have used it. I was on school councils at various schools and I had an impact. You can have an impact. The song, great education song. There are not many great songs about education, but of course it's another brick in the wall. We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. No dark sarcasm in the classroom. Teacher, leave them kids alone. Hey, teacher, leave them kids alone. All in all, you're just another brick in the wall. That's the question, isn't it? Your children being educated to be another brick in the wall. This song helps you to keep asking that question on a day-by-day basis. And I say, and you've heard me say it on previous shows, you are a weirdo. Each one of your children is a weirdo. And that weird aspect of each of us means that the education of each one of us cannot follow the line of just being a brick in the wall. That's what kills the desire for learning. And we are born with that desire for learning. And one thing that I've learned is that coffee is magnificent. My spiritual tip, just when we're talking about education, is for you to contemplate how do you educate children about spirituality? Because in government schools in Australia, and many government schools, there is no education around spirituality. How is it going to happen to the children whom you influence? How are you going to teach them about spirituality? My health tip, we're talking about children's education. Understand the crucial need for good nutrition in younger brains. This is the nutrition that we put into our body makes a massive difference in our ability to think, in our functioning. Not enough parents understand this crucial nutritional impact. I say take an interest in it. And at all times, of course, take an interest in your own nutrition, because if you've got brain fog, if you're unduly tired, then nutrition is a wonderful, wonderful starting point. And the most important nutritional point is dehydration. If you are dehydrated, you cannot think effectively. or you cannot think nearly as effectively as if you're not dehydrated. My quote from Nelson Mandela: education is the most powerful weapon that you can use to change the world. Education is the most powerful weapon that you can use to change the world. I agree with that. I'm an educator. That's why I'm an educator. The world is a battle of ideas, and education is the way that we share those ideas. And then we say to people, well, which idea do you wish to pursue? And then lastly, a spot of humour. And I thought, a spot of humour about school? No, I think I have a spot of humour about teachers, since I love teachers. And so there's a story I love of Mr. Robinson. So, Mr. Robinson, in the course of an out-of-town trip, like Julie's dad used to do, because he was a manufacturer and he would do lots of out-of-town trips. But anyway, I'm not casting any aspersions. Mr. Robinson had met a most accommodating young lady and spent a satisfactory night with her in the motel into which he had booked. Or at least it was most satisfactory until about 3 a.m. when the young lady woke up sobbing. She was sobbing in a most heartbroken fashion. Mr. Robinson, most uneasy, lest the noise of the weeping attract unwanted attention, and utterly uncertain as to what might follow, said nervously, "What's wrong, miss?" The young lady said between sobs, "I teach school back home. I have a 3rd grade class, and I was just thinking what my dear little pupils would say if they knew I'd made love twice in a motel room with an utter stranger." Mr. Robinson, deeply embarrassed, said, "I'm sorry, miss, to have made you feel so badly, but frankly, if we want to be absolutely accurate about this, we only made love once." The young lady's sobs stopped instantly. She said sharply, "Do you mean you're not planning to do it again?" You like that? I like that. The game of humour. I love humour, as regular viewers and listeners would know. So, take the steps, the resources, and consider today's big idea and the relevance of taking responsibility for children's education and not leaving it to government. And that decision of whether you do take it, responsibility, is one of the steps of self-awareness. What do you take responsibility for, and what do you not take responsibility for? Life becomes better when you take responsibility. It becomes harder, but it becomes better. That is a crucial self-awareness element. My aim for this show is to provoke you, inspire you, motivate you to constantly search for increasing levels of self-awareness, to become more aware of what is a great life for you. I invite you to subscribe to this show via podcast or on the YouTube channel or the Rumble channel, to share it with your family, friends, and work colleagues if you enjoy it, to discover more about the self-awareness and passion quest and the passion journey at my websites, covest.com and charlescovest.com, and to consider my books, Passionate People Produce and Passionate Performance, both of which are available on those websites. So let's review some key happenings during the week. The first is on my TNT radio program, which is every Saturday at 4 p.m. Melbourne time. My guest yesterday was Bob Chemnitz, who is an engineer, a scientist, a researcher, a lifelong learner, and he was talking about the RSPCA in New South Wales. You would be horrified by the misleading representations made by that charitable organisation, by what Bob calls the fraud being perpetrated on its supporters, and the activities of the board of the RSPCA New South Wales, if you are genuinely concerned about animals. The Sound of Freedom movie, a documentary about the global child sex trade, and it's a horrific movie, and it talks about the truth of trafficking children, continues to boom. And the good news is it's coming to Australia from the 24th of August. its ticket sales are booming, and the silence of the Australian government, the silence of the Vatican about this enormous problem is deafening. I want you to think about, how can government be silent about the sex trafficking of children? It is evidence of the government's collusion in enabling that, because if the government was truly opposed to it, it would be driving attendance at this movie. No, they're trying to play it down. They're trying to say it's not a big problem. It's a huge $150 billion a year problem. The debate continues in Australia about the proposed change to the Australian Constitution. I'm implacably opposed to it. More and more evidence is coming out that the Voice is nefarious in its intent. Do not get sucked into the fact that anyone who opposes the Voice is a racist. That is total BS. When you look into the detail, how is this going to help anyone? No, it's not going to help the Aborigines. It's going to build another technocracy, and the money that will be screwed out of people on racial grounds in this country will be outrageous. Oppose, oppose, oppose. I am opposed. And then the Victorian government, led by the worst premier in our history, proposes to ban natural gas in new home developments from January next year. Understand what that means, that the key source of power is going to be electricity, and we all know there's not going to be sufficient electricity when they shut down coal-powered electric generators in this country. There is no way, scientifically, engineering terms, it can happen. And so look what's happening here. No gas, all in the name of saving the environment. Well, you've heard me on previous shows, there's no climate crisis. There's no boiling climate. This is a fraud. We have a soil emergency, we have a landscape emergency, we have a waste emergency. There is no climate emergency. Do not get sucked in and push back against this absurd decision, which is happening in other countries as well. Oh, we don't want gas. We don't want gas being used to save the environment. Lack of affordable, available energy will destroy the life that you think you have. All right, as you can see, I get passionate about such matters, and that's what education is. Great teachers are passionate. I'm passionate about everything I share with you. I don't share stuff with you that I don't consider to be important. So, if you're new to the show, stick around for the foundational principles of the show and some background about me. And again, thanks for watching or listening. And until our next show, may your week be full of passion, full of challenge, full of the willingness to embrace the challenges that life gives you, and through embracing those challenges, an ever-increasing level of self-awareness and learning about what is a great life for you. Have a great week. See you next week. Bye. And now, for viewers and listeners who want to know more about my background and what else I do with my life, as well as the foundational principles of the show. Here we are. Since 1993, when I left my legal career, a career that I love, to become Australasia's passion provocateur, I have inspired and provoked and educated and motivated people all over the world to discover and pursue their passion. I have helped people via the books that I've written, via speeches at conferences, via in-depth team building programs, workshops over 1, 2 or 3 days, or over 3 months, 6 months. And I've coached people of all ages, one-on-one, from small, medium and large enterprises, government enterprises, helping them to identify the often tiny changes that can make a massive difference. One of my core principles is that freedom is what makes us truly human. That's why one of the greatest threats that government imposes on you to force you to observe its laws is the threat of imprisonment, the loss of your freedom. Just think about that. Government says if you don't behave yourself, we're going to put you in jail. No, I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to lose my freedom. That's a reminder to you of why freedom is so important. Without freedom, you and I are not much different to animals. If you were locked up in a cage for the rest of your life, how different would you be to an animal? This commitment to fighting for freedoms for all people is carried out by me primarily through 5 channels. Number 1, preserving the freedom to pursue your passion. Number 2, inspiring you to be able to be free through excellent health. Number 3, helping preserve freedom throughout the world through the expansion of industrial hemp, a magnificent agricultural crop, an almost miraculous crop that enables every community to thrive independently of government. In this way, the power of government to take away freedom is minimized. Number 4, fighting for freedom through legal strategies. So I do work as a legal strategy consultant, as an interface between clients and their lawyers. And number 5, as chairman of the Australian Institute of Comedy and as a board member of the Australian Cartoon Museum, fighting for the freedom of thought and speech through uncensored comedy and humour, through avoiding political correctness in the comedic space. When you block freedom of speech, freedom of thought, that's the beginning of the end of your freedoms. The foundational principles for the Charles Covess Show are founded on the formula SA plus P equals S. Your self-awareness added to your passion will guarantee that you are successful. And the best definition of success I have found in life is that success is the progressive realization of your worthy ideals. The progressive realization of your worthy ideals. This show is also guided by Socrates' famous principle and quote, "The unexamined life is not worth living." You can see I'm wearing my red jacket. I wear my red jacket for all my shows. Red is the color of passion, so that when you see me on the YouTube version, it reminds you that when you see red in your life, you ask yourself the question, am I pursuing my passion? What am I passionate about? Am I still passionate about that? What might I newly be passionate about? Each week I explore one big idea that can change your life. And it's just one big idea because there's a chance you will remember it. If I give you too many ideas, then we get confused and we don't do anything. Clarity leads to power. Confusion kills passion. Each week I share simple and practical resources that you've heard me describe in the earlier part of the show. A spiritual tip, a health tip, lyrics of a song, a book, a quote, and of course humour. This show is not politically correct. I have no intention of being politically correct. And I love certain addictions, including my addiction to great coffee, my addiction to exercise, my addiction to reading, and my addiction to certain other unmentionable in public type behaviours. Who would know what they are? This show definitely subscribes to the view that we have a spiritual life. So if you don't like discussion of spirituality, this show is not for you. I promise you that I don't include anything in this show that I don't consider to be true and that I have not found to be useful in the work that I've done over the past 28 years, but also over the past 50 years in business, as a lawyer, as a consultant advisor. I only want to share stuff with you that is of value to you. Finally, if you have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to contact me at charles@covess.com. Again, thanks for watching and listening to my show. Bye.